So Blender version 5.0 was just recently released, and in the update they've added some new object modifiers which I'll be covering in this video. Now these new modifiers are actually powered by geometry nodes, but you can use them on the side panel on the modifier properties, which is the wrench icon there on the properties panel. And you can also purchase the project files of this tutorial to get the Blender file with these examples on my Gumroad store and Patreon page, so links are in the video description. So the first modifier is the array modifier. Now the array modifier was already a modifier in Blender, but they've actually added a new modifier which is powered by geometry nodes, and it has many new features. So if I click on add modifier and start to type in array, you can see there is array legacy, and so this is the old modifier. So if you want to use the old modifier just for more simple projects, or if you're following an older tutorial, you can still use all the same features of the old array. However, there's now a new array modifier, so let's add the new array modifier, and this array has some new features. One thing that you'll notice is that it's arraying 3 on default instead of 2, which I think is definitely better, because if you're just arraying 2, it almost looks like it could be a mirror modifier, just mirroring it over, so I like that they have 3 instead. Now if I click over here to go to the geometry nodes workspace, you can see this is being powered by geometry nodes. However, you don't really need to know what any of this stuff does, and you don't even need to use the geometry nodes workspace, because if I jump back to the layout, you can access all the settings of the array right here on the side panel. So of course you can turn up the count for how many objects you want it to array. So you can change the offset here, so you can change the offset X, Y, and Z just to offset the array and kind of move it up in a different position. Then you can also rotate it, but you can see as I start to rotate these, because each one is being arrayed from the previous one, they start to rotate more and more. So as I turn up this rotation, you can see the monkey heads are being rotated more and more. So that is pretty cool. And then there's also the scale values, so I can scale up these, and you can see as I scale them up more and more, each monkey head is getting larger and larger. Now there are a few different array types. So the first one is line, so it's just going to go in a straight line. But instead of line, I can also change this to circle. Let's just zoom in here. And then if you click on this little button right here, that's going to turn on the gizmos, and you can actually use this gizmo, so I can click and drag and kind of drag this out. So now all the monkeys are around in an array. So the circle array is going to be so useful for modeling so many things. You could do this before in the old Blender version with the old array, but you had to like set an object and put the object in the center, and then you had to have the object be arrayed around another object, but this is just going to make it so much easier. So you can change the count of it. You can also drag it back and forth here, or just drag the radius. You can also choose the central axis, so you can change it to the X, Y, or Z axis. And then you can also choose to make it an arc if you want to. And if you click right up here to turn on the gizmos, you can actually use the gizmos and you can drag the size of it. So that's pretty cool. Or you can just use this sweep angle. So if you just want it to be like half of a circle, you can just turn that up, or I can change it back to full. And there's also the count method, so there's either count or distance. So if I leave it at count, I could just type in like 3, and you can see now there's just going to be 3 of them. So I can just choose a specific count, or I can choose a distance, and so this is going to make a specific distance in between all of them. Now you can also choose to align the rotation or not align the rotation. So if I turn this off, you can see all the monkey heads are pointed in the same direction because it's copying the rotation from the first monkey. Or if you align the rotation, all the monkey heads are going to look into the center where they're rotating by. You can also change the forward axis and the up axis, which is really useful just for getting it to the correct angle that you want. Now we can also change it from circle to curve, and so this is going to be very useful. So this way we can actually make the monkey heads move along a curve. So I'm just going to go to the add menu, and I'm just going to go to curve, just add a Bezier curve, and I'll go into edit mode and just kind of scale the curve up here. Now I want to select the object for the monkey heads again, and for the curve object, I'm going to click on the eyedropper, and I'm going to select the curve. So now you can see all the monkey heads are following the curve. And I can also change like the forward axis and the up axis, and I can see all the monkey heads are pointed towards us. So if I go into edit mode, I want to go into edit mode of the curve, I can move the curve handles around. You can see the monkey heads are going to follow along with it. You can also change the count here, and you can also use distance or count, just like the other array settings. And then from curve, you can also use transform instead. And I'm just going to select the curve and delete it. Now, if I turn all of the settings back to the default on the transform here, on the transform type, I can just turn up the count here, and then I can also choose how far apart I want them to be. But then I can also rotate them. You can see as I rotate them, they're starting to like curve down. Now, it's actually kind of easier to use the gizmos. So you can say I can pull out the gizmos to like scale it. I can also rotate it, so I can rotate it around like that, maybe rotate it back a little bit. You can see we're getting a really cool effect where it's kind of rotating around in a circle. And I can also scale this, so if I just start to scale it up or down, you can see each one is going to get larger and larger. So now we're getting this really cool circular effect. Now, instead of just putting in specific input values, I can actually change this to object, and then I can actually have it be transformed by another object. So I just modeled this very simple arrow here, and I'm just going to stick the arrow right here. So I'm now going to select the monkey head, and I'm going to click on the object on the transform reference, and then I will click here on the eyedropper and choose this arrow. So now you can see as I rotate the arrow, it's going to rotate around. So this makes it very easy to control. So if I hit Alt R, Alt G, and Alt S, that's going to clear all the transforms of the arrow. So now if I just move the arrow, you can see all of the arrayed objects are being transformed by the translation, so the movement, rotation, or scale of the arrow. So if I rotate it, you can see they're all going to be rotated. If I rotate it up, they're all going to kind of rotate in a circle. If I scale them, they're all going to be scaled. Now on each one of these settings, so the line, circle, curve, and transform, there's also a randomize. So I can turn on this randomize. This is probably my favorite new feature about the array modifier out of all the settings. So with the randomize, you can randomize the location, rotation, and scale. So you can see I can randomize the offset. So this is basically going to move it around. So if I just offset these, they're just going to be randomly moved around. I can also do the same thing for the rotation. So I can turn this up. Let's just make this like a really big number. And now they're all randomized and they all have random rotations. And then I also can add a random scale. So if I turn this up, they're all going to have random scale values. So this will be useful for so many projects in the future. Now, one example that I wanted to show you is if you're like making a stack of bricks. So if you were just using the normal array and you wanted to stack up these bricks, you could just stack them up with the array modifier, but you wouldn't really be able to add any random transforms. You would have to like apply the array, separate them into their own object, and then like rotate each one. So you can see originally I just have one brick here. So now what I'm going to do is add the array, and I can turn up the count, and then I can go down here and turn on the randomize, and I can just change the random rotation. So you could change the random rotation for the X and Y axis, but in this case, I just want to turn it up for the Z axis. You can see as I turn this up here, it's kind of randomizing the rotation on the Z axis. So now it looks like we have like a pile of bricks. So this is very useful for maybe a stack of books or bricks or blocks. This is just going to be so useful. Now on the array modifier, there also is this merge setting. So if you turn on the merge setting, it's basically going to merge vertices which are close to the other vertices. So it's sort of like how the mirror modifier has the clipping, and the clipping is going to merge vertices. You can see here is the original object. So it's just this one little pipe joint, but because I'm arraying around in a circle, you can see now I'm using that distance value and turning it up. So now they all merge and connect together. So this will be very useful if you're arraying objects that you want them to be connected. Now the next modifier is the geometry input, and I don't find this one too useful. I probably won't use it for many projects, but this is basically going to add or replace the object's geometry for another object. So if you add geometry input, I'm just going to click on this object here or click on the eyedropper, and I'm going to choose the sphere, and now you can see it's adding the sphere to the original geometry. And then you can also choose to replace the original. So in this case, if you replace the original, it's going to get rid of the monkey head and just use the sphere. So it may be helpful for more complex setup and things. I probably won't use it that often though. Now the next modifier is instance on elements. So I have all of these little primitive objects here, and I've added them into a collection. So now here on this plane here, I'm going to add modifier, and I'm going to add the instance on elements. So now you can choose object or collection. So if I just use object, I'll click on the eyedropper and just choose the monkey here, and you can see now the monkey is going to be instanced on all of the vertices. If I open up the transform here, let's just take the scale and make it smaller so you can kind of see what it's doing. So if I hit tab to go into edit mode, you can see if I select the mesh and move it around, there's going to be a monkey head on each one of the vertices of the object. And why that is because the instance here, it's set to point. But you could also change it to edge. So now you can see they're going to be on the edges, or you can also change it to face. So now you can see there's going to be one monkey head in the center of every single face of our plane. Or you can also change it to the corners. But in this case, I will just leave it set to points. Now, as well as using an object, you can choose a collection. So I'm going to choose a collection, and then I'm just going to choose this objects collection, which has these three objects. Now, right now you can see they're all on top of each other, but I want to use the pick instance button. So if I choose the pick instance, it's going to choose a random object within our collection and place it on each one of the vertices. Now, if you open up the pick instance, there is random. You can also change it to sequence, or you can change it to input. And if you change this value, it's going to change between each one of the objects. I would probably just use random most of the time. And then you can also change the seed here. So if you don't like how the seed is, you can just drag that seed value and just kind of randomize them. Now there's also this cool mask. So if you turn this down, this is basically going to randomly start to take away more and more of the objects. So if you want them to kind of be more randomly placed, but have them only be in some spots here and there, you can easily just turn down the mask. Now under the transform settings, there also is a surface offset. So this would be cool if you're just like placing an object on another object, but you want to look like it's sitting on top. Like let's say that I want these cones here to look like they're sitting on top of the plane. So I can just drag the surface offset and they are going to move up by the direction of the face. So basically the normals of the object. And then you can also choose to align the rotation or not. So you can see if you don't align it, all of the cones are pointed up, but if you align the rotation, it's going to point with the direction of the faces. And then of course you can also scale all the objects. Now if I go right back up here to this mask, instead of just changing the mask value by dragging this up and down, you can actually weight paint where you want the objects to be. So I'm going to click on object mode and go to weight paint. So if I just click and drag, that's going to add value. And so it's going to be red if there's more value. If I hold down the control key and then drag, that's going to get rid of value. Now to actually make the objects just show up where it's red, if you click on this little button here, this is the input attribute toggle. And if I click on this, that is going to get rid of the slider. So now if I click here on the mask, I can choose a different mask here. And to use the weight painting, you want to choose the point group float. So choose that one. And now you can see just where we weight painted, the objects are going to show up. And if you don't know which one it is on the point group float, if you have many of them in your scene, then you can click right up here on the weight painting and you could rename this. So I could just rename this to weight paint. And then if I click here on the mask, I could just choose the weight painting. So this is a really cool way to just control exactly where the objects are going to show up. And if you don't want to see the original mesh, if you want the original mesh to be invisible, you can click on the keep surface and turn that off so it's invisible. Now where hiding the original mesh could be useful is something like this if you want to create like chainmail. So here's the original object. So you can see I have some circles and the circles have some thickness and there's two of them and they're connecting. Now if you go to top view, if I just go to top view, I rotate them over slightly so they're slightly offset. And then I also put the origin point kind of right here so it's not in the very center. And then I just instanced it on the elements. So then I can of course change the scale of it, so I can scale it up so they're kind of overlapping each other. And then I can also turn off the keep surface. So if I turn off the keep surface, now it looks like a piece of chainmail. So that is pretty cool. Now there's another modifier which you can add after one of these previous modifiers, and that is the Randomize Transforms. So let's just add it. So I'm going to search for Randomize Transforms. I'll add this and I'll just scroll down here. And so what this is going to do, it's going to randomize all of the instances. So you have to have an object which has instances. So in this case, we have instance on elements. So this object now has instances. So now I can use the Randomize Transforms and I can change the offset. So that's going to kind of randomize it. I can also change the rotation. So let me just make this a big value so you can kind of see what's happening. And then I can also change the scale. So this is a really cool secondary modifier to add to just randomize the transforms of another object. Now there's another modifier which has been added called the scatter on surface, and this is by far going to be the most useful modifier because this is probably the main thing that people use geometry nodes for. So with the scatter on surface, you can just scatter or place a bunch of objects on another surface. So this is similar to the instance on elements, but with the scatter on surface, you can actually scatter it much more randomly. So I just have this basic ground plane here, and I'm going to add modifier, and I'm going to scatter on surface. So now right over here, I have some grass objects and some rock objects, and so what I can do is go right down here to the instancing, and I can either choose a single object. So for example, I could click on the eyedropper and just choose this grass here, and now the grass is going to be on the ground, or I can use collection and I can add my nature collection. Now you can see they're randomly all over the place and kind of distorted. That's because I want to turn on the pick instance, and now it's going to randomly pick different objects and place it on the ground. And just like the previous geometry node setup, you can change from random to Poisson disk. And if you change it to Poisson disk, there's going to be this minimum distance value. So let's first turn up the density to make it really, really strong. So now you can see there's tons of grass overlapping each other, but then I can turn up the minimum distance just like we've done before in other tutorials using the geometry nodes. So if I turn this up, there's going to be a minimum distance in between each object. So this way the objects aren't overlapping each other. So this will be very useful for like adding nature to ground like I'm doing here. It could also be useful for adding sprinkles on donuts or many other things. Then there's also the distribution mask, which is kind of just randomly adding more and less of it. So it's just kind of like a factor value. And then of course there's the density to add more and less of it. Now there's also density and amount. So probably most of the time you're going to want to leave it at density, but you could also change it to amount, and now you can choose a specific amount. So I could add 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see as I add more, it's going to add this specific amount. But in this case, I'm going to leave it at density. You can also change the seed value. So if you don't like where they're placed, you can easily just just change that seed. There's also a viewport visibility, which is going to be very useful because if your scene is starting to get kind of laggy in the viewport, you can just turn down the viewport visibility, but it's still going to render with the full visibility. Now you can also open up the transform settings and you can change the transforms. So there's surface offset, so this is very useful. So maybe you have like some ground objects, maybe some nature objects, but they're just a little bit too low into the dirt, you could just move them up a little bit. Or if you just have rocks, but the rocks are a little bit too high up and you want to push them down into the dirt, you could easily just change the surface offset and push them down into the dirt. So that's looking really cool. You can also change the alignment axis, but in my case, I just want to leave this at the Z so they're pointed up. And then you can also change the scale of the objects. Now there's also a randomize value, so I'll turn this on and open it up. And this would be very similar to adding the random value node into the location, rotation, or scale. So you can see there is the rotation, so I can make a random rotation, so I can turn this up a little bit, and then I can turn up the Z value to a really big number, so it's all rotated around randomly. I can also change the scale to add a random scale to it, and then there's also an offset if I want to offset them. In this case, I don't want to offset them. And then I can also change the seed of the randomize. Now, instead of using the distribution mask to just add more and less, you can actually weight paint where you want the objects to show up, just like we've done in past tutorials using geometry nodes. So if I click on object mode and go to weight painting, I can actually weight paint where I want the objects to show up. So if you click and drag, that's going to add value. But if I hold down the control key and click and drag, that's going to get rid of value. So I can just paint in a simple path here in the nature scene. And then if I click here on the weight painting, I also just rename this to grass. So I'll go from weight painting back to object mode. And now if I go here to the distribution mask, I'll click on the input attribute toggle. And then if I click on the distribution mask, I can use the point grass float. I renamed it to grass, so I'll just click on that. And now you can see the grass is only going to show up where we've weight painted. So this is going to be super useful, especially for nature scenes. Now I'm going to delete the weight painting and I'm going to scroll all the way to the very bottom and turn on the masking. So you could add the masking and then you can add a specific like black and white texture, and then the objects are only going to show up in specific spots where the texture is. So you can click on the open button to open a texture. What I'm going to do is click here and I'm going to add this like rock texture. So basically it's just a rock roughness map, but basically there's black and white values. And if you don't add a texture which is very contrasty, you may not be able to see it so well. So make sure you add an object which has a lot of black and white contrast. You can also choose a specific UV map, but in this case, this object just has one UV map. So I'll go to top view, I'll go into edit mode, and I'll select everything, and I will hit U, and I'm going to unwrap, and I'm going to do the project from view. So now I can scale this up and move it around here, and you can see now the objects are only going to show up where the white spot is on the texture. Now the last modifier is curve to tube, and so with this modifier, you can just take a curve object and you can add a tube shape to it. And so these options were already in Blender. If you go to the curve settings, you could actually do this with the curve settings, but there are a few more new values and it is a bit easier to control with the modifiers. So for example, I just have this S-shaped curve and I'm going to click on add modifier and I can add curve to tube. So I'll add curve to tube and then I can just turn up the scale to give it more thickness. You can also choose to use a UV map. So if I turn on the UV map, it's actually going to show a texture on the object. But of course you need to make sure you actually add a material to the object. So I can change the scale of it to make it thicker. And then there's also a mode. So there's a round and custom. So I'm just going to leave it to round for now, but I'll show you the custom later. Then there's also the resolution. So you can see if I turn this down and up, that's just going to change the resolution. So you can see right now it's like a triangle, or I can turn this up and make it a lot thicker. And this already was an option over here on the curve settings, but it's pretty cool that it's also a modifier. And then I can also choose to shade it smooth or flat. Now, if I use the resample here, I can also change the resolution, but along the curve. So right now the mode is set to evaluated on the resample curve, but I could instead change this to like count, and then I could turn up a specific count. So you can see this is going to change the resolution, but going along the curve instead. So I could choose a specific number, but I'll just leave this to the default. Now there's also the cap option, and this is going to be very useful. Now, if you turn the cap off, there's going to be a complete hole, so you can see through it, or you can turn the cap on and you can leave it set to flat, or you can change it to round. So finally, Blender has a really easy feature to round out the caps. So this is going to be so useful for a lot of projects. Now you can also change it to custom, and you could add a custom object to the starting and the ending. So you can see I just added these little bulbous objects here. They kind of look like door handles. So if I click back on my curve here and change the cap to custom, I can choose a start object and an end object, and then those objects are going to be at the starting and ending. So I'll click on the eyedropper and choose this one here, and that's actually the wrong one. So I'll click on the eyedropper again and choose this one here. And then for the end one, I'll click on the eyedropper and choose this one here. And then if you go into edit mode, you can also change the scale of this. And I just changed the scale so it basically fit the size of the curve. And you also want to make sure that the origin point is in the center of the objects, because if they're not in the very center, then there's going to be a weird offset. So you can see the origin point is kind of right there at the very end of the caps. Now you can also make a custom shape for your tube. So I just have a basic curve here, but then you can see I have another curve object, and I just kind of scaled the curve handles to make it kind of this wacky shape. So if I select the curve, what I can do is go to the profile, and instead of the mode being set to round, which is just going to make it circular, I can change it to custom. Then what I can do is add a specific curve. So if I click on the eyedropper here, I can just choose another curve object. So now if you look here on the top, you can see that the curve shape is actually going to be the shape of that curve. And this also was a feature in the previous Blender version. You could do this on the curve settings, but it's pretty cool that it's now a modifier. And then if I just change the shape of this, like maybe scale it or scale this up and down, I can easily change the shape of that. So those are all the new modifiers in Blender version 5.0 and how to use them. So I hope you found the video helpful, and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to purchase the project files and get this Blender file with all the modifier examples, you can get that with the links in the video description on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Now if you'd like to learn about all the main modifiers in Blender and all the other modifiers which you'll commonly use, then I do have a Modifiers for Beginners tutorial where I go over all the main modifiers like the subdivision surface modifier, the array modifier, the mirror modifier, and many more common modifiers. So you can check out that Modifiers for Beginners tutorial with the link in the description or right up there on the end screen. So I hope you found the video helpful, and thanks for watching.